Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining our Choreomundus Alumni Book Club. Today, we're so fortunate to have Anya Peterson Royce with us to discuss her book, Anthropology of the Performing Arts. I know Anya needs no introduction, but I'm just going to read out a very quick, short paragraph for those who haven't met her. Anya came to Hungary in 2014 when we were there, cohort 2 were there, and we got to meet her, and we had a little symposium with her together in Budapest. So Anya Peterson Royce is Chancellor's Professor of Anthropology at Indiana University, Bloomington. She does research and writes in the areas of the anthropology of dance and the performing arts, ethnic identity, and the ethnography of Mexico, especially the Zapotec of Yucatan, Osaka. Sorry, I'm not saying it right.
It's Juchitán, Oaxaca.
Juchitán, Oaxaca. Okay.
Right.
Where she has conducted field research for 50 years now.
Since 1967, I think it's the 6th decade. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. Okay.
Long time.
Yeah. So without further ado, everyone, I'll let Anya give us a short introduction and her reflection of the book. And then when we have time, we can do a short round of introduction with everyone. So you get to interact personally with Anya too.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you very much, Shani. I thought I would start by talking about, I was asked to do a blog for the anthropology department. They asked retired faculty to reflect on their careers. And one of the questions they asked was, what other profession would you choose if you could? And I answered it saying I already had 2 careers and I liked each one of them. So I'm just going to whiz through my early life because it was really around dance and anything that was embodied. I lettered in 4 sports in high school, for example. So at the age of 7, I started taking ballet classes. It was a neighborhood studio. This is in Berkeley, California. And but the teacher had really good training. She was a kind of a funny combination of Danish and the American version of Michael Fouquet. She was very strict, and the yearly recitals actually demanded a command of the technique as well as some interpretation. My last year, and so I started when I was 7, my last year of elementary school, I started commuting to San Francisco Ballet. So I took a bus from my house to the F train at the top of the Alameda, and I took the train to San Francisco and then another bus to the studio of San Francisco Ballet. And I did the same thing coming back. And I did my homework on the train. It was a 90-minute class, so it was kind of an hour and a half getting there in a 90-minute class. By high school, I was taking 5 classes a week, who were taught by dancers who were trained by those Russian dancers of the Diaghilev company who came to the United States. And it was just thrilling to have that opportunity to be trained by them, and sort of the demand that was set on people, especially as we got geared up toward Nutcracker season, and everybody was waiting to see their name on the little list. So kind of to be a lady in waiting at the Nutcracker at the War Memorial Opera House was just, that was it. And then there came a little pause because I'd been given a full scholarship to Stanford University. And but ballet was really what I wanted to do, but I decided, okay, I can do both. So I went to Stanford and I took classes at San Francisco Ballet for that whole year, taking classes, 5 classes a week. And it was, I commuted to San Francisco from Palo Alto, and if you guys don't know, it's about an hour and a half, maybe commute. And I had no car, so I rode my bike from the campus to the bus station, took the bus and then took the other bus and then did the same thing coming back. by the end of the academic year, I realized, I don't think I can continue doing this. I can't do either one the way I wanted to do it. So I decided I would go to New York and just dance. And I took Russian that first year at Stanford. And my Russian instructor had friends who lived in New York City who were white Russians. And so she gave me the name of one of them, and I was able to rent a room in the apartment of these lovely people, the Makedonovs, who were white Russians. So I went to New York with one suitcase, $400, and their address. And so for the next 3.5 years, I lived with them. I took classes at the School of American Ballet, again with the Russians who had left the Diaghilev Company, and Ballet Russe. I danced with the Brooklyn Ballet and for a year with the Deutsche Operettentheater, which was, we did the Merry Widow a lot. So I got a good training in can-can dancing in that. And I lived on that Upper West Side of New York City, where I spoke Russian at home and Spanish on the streets. Money was always an issue for me, for dancers. And we got paid by the performance by the Brooklyn Ballet, but it was $20 a performance, and we didn't perform all the time. In good times, like Nutcracker season, we had a lot of performances. And we also had the opera, because this was the Brooklyn Academy of Music, which was a really important place for music and dance, still is. So we had Hansel and Gretel, and there were maybe 6 performances of the opera. So we were living pretty high, and I could pay the rent. Otherwise, I had odd jobs, which is the story of a lot of dancers, I think. But the best odd job was the last year I was in New York, and it was at First National City Bank, and I processed checks on the midnight to 8 shift. Yeah, which was good. It was full of people in the theater, because it meant you could do a performance and then go to work, and you'd get out in time for rehearsal. So not much sleep, but otherwise it was really good. So the other thing that was really important for me in reflecting about, especially the performing arts book, I saw a lot of performance when I was there, and I was a regular in the standing room line at the Met for opera, for dance, and for symphonies on those nights when I didn't have a performance. And the opera was really, I thought for a while I would be a singer, but that was not going to work. But I still loved it. And opera was a staple at the Brooklyn Academy of Music where we performed. And so we got hired for the dance interludes. And it gave me a lot more knowledge to think about opera in particular as a performing arts. I shared the stage with people like, these are old people, so you might not know them, Zinka Milanov and Robert Merrill, and we did a really memorable Aida. And it was memorable, especially because we were in the first act and we were in the fourth act, and in between you have to stay warmed up, right? But at the Metropolitan, I met people like Marcel Marceau, who I don't know when I met him, but we were friends for 40 years until he died, and he was a really important influence on me. Saul Hurak, who was the great impresario, Igor Moiseyev, Jose Greco and his dancers, and then all of the dancers who had come from Russia. And the Kirov Ballet was doing its first US performance when I was in New York City. And they had a rehearsal, I think, of the Academy of Music or School of American Ballet, and I was there. And so I got to be an interpreter for them, because they kind of, they would like an interpreter who could come to classes and be a participant. So although they laughed at my Russian because it was really old style, pre-revolutionary Russian, very polite. But it meant that I got to know them really well. I got to take class with them. And if you can imagine standing in a class at a bar with dancers from the Kirov, when their arabesque is right up here and yours is somewhere down here, it's a little intimidating. But a lot of what I've written about the arts comes from that, and about and then the time when I went to California, and later on meeting and talking with artists about what it was that they did. So I left New York for San Francisco, and I was a principal dancer in San Francisco for 3 years with the San Francisco Russian Opera and Ballet Company. And I taught in another teaching gig because dancing was paid by the performance. And so, as often happens in dance, I was injured during a rehearsal. And my last performance was as Zobeide in Fokines Scheherazade, which is still my favorite. I think I sent you that photo, maybe, Shani. Yeah. The good thing about this book, and I don't mean that you have to run out and buy it, but one of the nice things is that the frontispiece was one of my really great teachers, Ludmila Scholar, in Scheherazade. Okay. And my photograph, which ends the book, is also in Scheherazade. I'm trying to find it now. Oh, yeah. So it's kind of the teacher and the student that kind of bring that little book together. So I thought, since I was in San Francisco, I would go back to school and finish my BA. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a scholarship anymore because that got lost when I went to New York City. So I commuted to San Francisco and taught for Sergei Timov 5 nights a week. I had a car this time. I bought a used Volkswagen Beetle. So in the meantime, at Stanford, I thought I would major in comp lit because I had acquired, I had 4 or 5 languages, and I thought, well, I can do this. But then I took an anthropology class, and I thought that was it for me. The person who taught it was mesmerizing. He was a great teacher, and I realized that the notion of listening to, rather than reading about, was really what I was probably best at and what I liked. So listening to people, watching people, rather than writing about something at secondhand. The Ford Foundation at that time had a scholarship program for undergrads and to work anywhere in Latin America. So I applied for it and I got it. And I went to Mexico because I spoke Spanish. And I applied to look at folk and indigenous dance in Mexico. And the first month I spent with the Ballet Folklórico de Amalia Hernandez. Remember Mexico City, 7,000 feet. And I was taking classes with them. And I was watching rehearsals. And the first week I thought I was dying because of the altitude. But I got used to it. I emphasized the working with them and taking classes and learning the technique and learning the repertoire, because that really was important in the way that I approached dance in general. I was interested in their choice of dances that were going to appeal to a big audience, as opposed to dance that was done around in Oaxaca. So the next months I traveled to Oaxaca. There's a big, huge festival every July, and every indigenous group in Oaxaca brings their dances and music and performs. I was just struck dumb by that, and especially by the group from Juchitán, the group from the Isthmus. And then I went out to the coast of Veracruz to document a very different kind of dance, because both of those were performed in the Ballet Folklórico. So that was the sort of the beginning of my work. But the summer of 1968 was really memorable too, because I had not really been to Juchitán yet. I'd only seen their dances. The end of that May, I graduated from Stanford. My husband had gone off to Harvard in the meantime, and he came back. We got married, and a week later, we got in the same Volkswagen, and drove to Mexico. And he had he was very brave, I have to say. he had a scholarship to study, remember this is 1968, and the scholarship was to study student protests. And Mexico was just a hotbed of protests. And so it became clear that it was really too dangerous to go to universities and talk with students who were being shot by the troops. So we went to, I said, let's just go to Juchitán because I want to see what it really looks like. I want to see where the dancers and dances came from. And we got there right in time for the big season of, they're called velas, but they're 4-day celebrations of music and dance, and they have religious connotations as well. So we really were introduced to Juchitán at its festive best. Driving out of the city, our car broke down. This wonderful Volkswagen finally broke down. Then there was no Volkswagen agency anywhere, but there was a Ford place that towed the car, and I had to translate the Volkswagen manual from German into Spanish. And my husband had to tell me what the parts did because I didn't know anything about how cars worked. So it was a long process. And then I gave the Spanish translation to the head of the Ford agency, who then translated it into Zapotec, which is the language of the workmen. So a month later, the car was fixed and we drove back home. But that was the kind of, by the time we had spent maybe 2 months in the Isthmus and Juchitán, we were both convinced that this is where we wanted to go and do our work. So we both went back to Berkeley to do PhDs, and I'm taking up too much time, so I can quit whenever you like and pick it up.
Yeah, it's okay, Anya, go ahead.
It's okay?
Yeah.
We were both committed to working in Mexico, to working in Oaxaca, and to work with this community. And my husband was a linguist, linguistic anthropologist, and a great photographer. So we made a pretty good team. But I worked with powwow groups in the San Francisco Bay Area while we were doing our degree. And then went off and did a year's worth of fieldwork in Juchitán, and I won't go into that. We first got there, and I knew people, the dancers who had danced in the Galilettes, I knew them, but the community was in an election for municipal president, and it turned out to be the first time in Mexican history that the Socialist Party won the election. So it was the climate was electric, and I had made a bunch of clothes that I thought would be good for weather when it's 102 and humid. And one of them was in the colors of the Socialist Party, unbeknownst to me, right? So I'm on a street corner watching this parade go through and, taking notes like a good field worker. And all of a sudden, people were calling me paisana and picked me up and put me on the truck. Yeah. So that was, then I became really known to other people. I was suspected when we first got there that we were CIA because we were Americans, and Project Camelot had just happened, and it was an anthropologist involved in it. And then they knew I spoke Russian, so they decided I must be KGB. But when I got put on the truck of the Socialist Party, I was one of them. My dissertation was not on dance, although dance was part of it, but it was about the social and political ways in which the community worked together as a community to maintain a heritage and to speak for Indigenous people in Mexico. It's a very powerful political, and that was my first book. I came to IU. I turned down 4 other job offers, and I came to IU because I was able to be in a place that had a really strong performing arts tradition, School of Music, and the dance program in theater and drama. And it was also really strong in Mexico and Latin America, so it seemed to be good. I was invited immediately to teach in the ballet program, of course, right, for free, because my money was coming from Anthropology. So they got me for free to teach advanced technique and classical variations, which I loved. I loved doing that. I loved to be working with dancers and around dancers. More recently now, I teach the history of ballet class, one of the first parts of the history of ballet. So, and I was the dance reviewer for the local newspaper for 5 years, 6 years maybe, which was really good, learning how to talk about dance to a general audience. But there were also wonderful, wonderful performers across the university and in the School of Music. And so I would go to their classes, their master classes, and watch them teach and watch, what the students were doing, talk with them about what performance meant for them. So people, Janos Starker, one of the great cellists, Virginia Ziani was an opera singer. Of course, I had to go to hear an opera singer. And they both came and watched me set classical variations in the ballet school. And then we talked about the similarities in how we took these apart and put them back together and had students do it. So it was wonderful. And I got to satisfy another one of my great interests. And no, it was not singing opera. It was playing the cello. I took 3 years of cello classes, and because it was not a classroom class. You were doing stuff, so you had to enroll in it. You couldn't just audit. So I was enrolled, and I have 3 years of straight A's in cello, if anybody is interested in that. More importantly, I got to spend time with the cello faculty and see a lot of performances and kind of see from the inside out while I was learning the kind of, the techniques and things like that. And I got to play the second cello sometimes when they had a performance that was a quintet instead of this great quartet. So it was terrifying. When Janos Starker would come, we had to play juries, which meant you had to, sit and play for 10 minutes, and anybody on the faculty could come. And Starker would come every time I played a jury in cello. And, it was like having a great vibrato in both hands, the bow hand, and then when he was sitting in the room. And then I got to collaborate with the early music program. Thomas Binkley was one of the great people in early music. And we did the first performance, I think, on the West Coast, certainly, was created by Orazio Vecchi. It's an opera buffa. It was performed in 1580, I guess. And Thomas did the music, and I did the Commedia dell'arte interludes. So being there was an extraordinary place for me to be able to be with people. And the Anthropology of Performing Arts book is so much based on those kinds of conversations and being in that environment and really seeing the behind the scenes performing and then the audience reactions to it was really essential for me. Yeah. Okay. The only last thing I'm going to say is that in that little blog that I had to write for being retired, one of the questions was, what was your favorite book that you wrote? And it was hard to think about that, but this one, The Anthropology of Performing Arts, was the book that for me let me bring my experience both as an anthropologist and as a performer together in a really meaningful way and expand it. So yeah, okay. I can't wait to hear your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Now you know the whole history of my life.
Well, it's so rare to, to be able to have this opportunity to hear from you. What enables us, for example, a 60-year relationship with a community. And this is what I think all of us as dance anthropologists, perhaps, I wouldn't say strive towards, but maybe it's like a dream to have that long-lasting relationship with the community, because nowadays everything is so short-spanned, and then we have people going into the field, spending just a couple of days extracting information and then leaving and never to return again. but you were adopted into the community as family. And I love the story of you in the field, and it was such a exciting time to be conducting field work. But perhaps every moment in time is exciting. For those who just joined us, so we're now entering the second part of our book club, where we'll share a favorite line in the book. So for those who have read the book, feel free to hop in anytime you want. So I'll start. Actually, my very favorite line is the last paragraph of your book, but it might seem a little bit odd to start the whole book club discussion with it. But please allow me to share it with all of us here. Performers in all guises are exotic beings. Their discipline, accomplishment, and passion separates them from the rest of the world. We praise them, we pry into their lives, and we sometimes resent their single-mindedness and even their talent. But in the end, we need what they bring us. Through them, we touch a part of our world and of ourselves that is otherwise quite inaccessible. They are the medium through which what matters finds a voice and a means of expression. They heal us, sometimes our physical bodies, and sometimes, as importantly, our hearts, and allow us to soar, if only briefly. It is uncomfortable ground for the performer, the daily striving for perfection that is always unattainable, the ephemerality of performance, the necessity of setting aside of ego at the very moment when you are center stage, the loneliness of being set apart. All performers share the element of absolute conviction with their colleagues, the shamans. Whether like the griots or the Balinese trancers or the Haitian dancers, whose bodies are homes for the gods, all performers understand that they are owned by their passion and driven by the need to master the craft of their art. In this search for common ground in our definitions of artistry and virtuosity lies the hope of greater understanding of performing artists and what they do, those who choose the path of interpretation and so give the world moments of enlightenment couched in the simplicity of imagination. So that's my favorite paragraph of the whole book. Yeah,
I think I would have picked that too.
Yeah, especially I think as as dancers, as anthropologists ourselves, we really know where you're coming from, as that embodied experience of and the discipline of going through the training. And I would add, because in the book, you also mentioned in several points that there are parallels between performers and ethnographers. And I would really think that the artistry and the virtuosity also applies to ethnographers, of being disciplined enough to develop time in the field and the skills. And perhaps this will lead on to Natasha's question about what skills are required. But Natasha, I'll let you perhaps raise the question yourself if you're ready.
Shani, I just have a little interruption before Natasha goes on. I think it would be very nice to all introduce ourselves.
Okay, right? Yeah, for sure.
I mean, Natasha, you can go ahead and just have this round of presentation so that Anya can meet us. So I'm just gonna do briefly. I am Beatriz. I am from Guatemala. I am very, very close to Oaxaca, actually. So it was very nice to to hear about it. And yeah, I'm so happy to meet you and know how much languages do you know. That's so amazing.
Thank you. I would love to actually to get to Guatemala at some point. But when my family are very jealous of my time. So when I come to Mexico, they've already planted where I'm going to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story. Really, that's that adds so much to the whole, place that you come from and the need to write in the way you did for this book. And I feel I had kind of a bittersweet feeling when you talked about this very serious commitment that you had traveling so many hours to get to dance class and back, because I've experienced the same, and I see that it's not happening anymore. And especially I'm based in Greece right now. There's just a lack of motivation for anybody to just not have their Pilates studio around the corner in order to practice an art. They everything has been kind of surfaced to the same just hobby kind of thing. And even though they show excitement, they don't have the commitment, and that maybe takes people away from actually putting the effort practicing a technique. Like you explained so much of what technique is in that book as well. And I also felt so close to the multitasking and the so many hats that you had to wear to survive and to actually make it. And it feels so warming because it's such a hard reality to be a performing artist. And I don't know if I've ever met anybody who only did that in their life and nothing else. I find pleasure in also teaching and the academia, but the social aspects and social political conversations and work. And it's so hard to balance everything, or to convince one that you are a good dancer as well as you're a good academic. And these hats sometimes confuse people. And so I'm so glad to hear that you managed to find this balance and just get all the information that you could from every area that surrounded the dance. So it's very, very just heartwarming to know that this is a survival mode, basically, which I find very useful, to be a multitasker. So just to the quote that I will say is from one of the notes that were attached to the event, which was from the aftermath in chapter 12, and it just resonates with me because at this moment, and I found it as a powerful quote for the dancer as having a mission. So in the audience part on page 232, there's a second sentence that said, "Just as performers must strive for the most complete understanding of the creator's intentions, so must they understand the public who receive the embodied work." And in the end of that paragraph, you're right, the goal is to move the audience beyond itself to a place where it can dream or imagine. The goal of all art, shared by creator, interpreter, and most certainly by the people who come to see it. And this gives such a purpose to us who perform or who teach, because I find teaching as a performance, as an on-the-spot performance, and how I'm always seeking for that experience, for that little light that goes up in someone's eye of having obtained something, and having felt a bit more important, and their small vocal improvisation just elevates them, and that there's that moment for them to put their self in the group. I work a lot with participatory audience, and how you can play, because I do tap dance and body music mostly, and I just work a lot with a call and response from the public. It even reminds me of, I did research among Nigerians in the diaspora and in Nigeria during Choreomundus and after, and I have been doing research in the Nigerian churches here in Greece, and it's the closest thing that I would experience as the gospel music here. And you can see this this mediator position between, let's say, the choir as a mediator between the audience and the divine. They're trying to give them whatever they have to elevate their spirit in order to reach something higher. And I find this such an important role that we as performers, not merely entertainers, but performers and just connectors between reality and something a bit further than that. So that's what really, really struck me. I don't know if you have anything to say about that. I mean, I have a question if you were collecting later, but I don't want to take so much time. I'd rather just comment on what you said and read.
I will actually, listening to what you were doing, the work that you were doing in Nigeria in particular, recommend a book by, she's a colleague of mine from the University of Limerick, from the Irish World Academy, Helen Phelan. She worked with refugees and immigrants in Limerick on music, on singing, choral groups. And it's an extraordinary book about how that ability to use that music in a context where they're strange, to be able to come together like that and have it recognized and honored. It's an extraordinary book. And I will, Shani, can you give me everybody's email if they don't mind?
For sure.
And I will email you that. I'm making a note to email that book. It just,
Lovely. Thank you.
is exactly what you were talking about.
Right.
And just wanted to comment about the kinds of people's willingness to go the extra mile. One of the reasons I love the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance is that's exactly what they do. The students who are there, they work at their craft, they work with the community, and there's this bond between the faculty and the students. It's extraordinary. So yeah, that's a plug.
I see Somya has her hand up.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm from India, so it's probably a little bit difficult. Is everyone, am I audible?
yes, you are.
Yes, perfect. Okay, firstly, Shani, thank you so much for organizing this. Anya, it's a real pleasure to meet you because I'm from cohort 6. I'm a recent graduate from the Choreomundus program. And I've always had this question of dance is done. It's an action. So how do you study it? How do you write about it? And I read the chapter 1 that you've written, and it really gave me a very good understanding of why you need to study dance, because it gives you an insight into a culture. Like literally one line that you wrote, and it sort of answered my question. But I do have 2 questions for you, and I'll quickly ask them so that other people can also take their time. You wrote that there are rules that define a particular genre. And in today's time where fusion is a very, very common thing, like I am a belly dancer, but I also know a bit of Indian classical dance. So we guys fuse belly dancing with Indian classical in India, and it's sort of become like its own thing now. So it's very interesting to me that how do we still classify a dance, if that is the right word. And the other thing is, because it came from what you said about the whole socio-political thing that you were writing about, reading about, interested in. Do you think the political climate of a country has actual effect on the dance, or how it is presented, or how it is marketed in some sense? Because I am very interested in the business economic side of dance, and how things affect it. How do you actually change the form due to certain things? So just 2 questions. Basically, one is the rules that you said, the rules that define the genre, and the political climate. So that's it from my side.
Wow. Those are at least 2 books. The questions are at least 2 books. I think that one, at any point in time, I mean, Zapotec dance, the sones in Juchitán have changed over time. I mean, of course they change. They don't stay frozen in the, and the while people in my family will point to me as an example of the way it used to be done and ought to be done, right? It's not what you see mostly done. And so the rules for how a young dancer today performs are different from the rules about performing that same dance when I learned it. So yeah, so you change the rules, and especially if you're merging forms all the time. I think that people who are engaged in that kind of fusion have a pretty good notion about what it ought to look like, what it ought to feel like when it comes out as a product. And those become the rules for that moment, for that group, for that time period, I think, right? So you can, and the rules in
But
um,
Anya, sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
isn't rules a very, very strong, almost like a codified language term,
yes,
which a lot of dance forms don't have, especially belly dancing, for example, because they say the origins are not known, it's not documented. So, uh, I mean, this line really interested me, but I don't know how today's time that are not documented the way Indian classical is.
okay. I think that people have a. I don't think that if you're part of even if it's a very small group performing in one of these kinds of fusion or dances in process of becoming something else, I think however small and however limited it is, I think people have a sense of what it is that they should be doing. Okay, so that somebody can't come in and join and do something totally different and have it be accepted. And so in that sense, you can say there is a sense of what's appropriate. Okay, so you cannot call it rules, but what's appropriate. And by the way, one of my PhD students is in Cairo right now doing belly dance. Her dissertation is on belly dance, and if you like, I will send you her. She's extraordinary. She's an extraordinary dancer, and what she's doing is really extraordinary because she's looking at Egypt as kind of the one of the origin points, and in Egypt as a recipient of Russian belly dancers who come to Egypt to perform. So I'll send you that. Political.
Thank you.
Yeah, political. What's political? I forgot the political question.
That was just that. Do you think the political climate of a country, because I'm also interested in the South Asian
Yes.
fight that's going on. So does that actually affect the dance? Do you think it makes a difference on how the dance is marketed or how it's presented now?
Yes,
Would you
I do.
have? Okay.
I do. I mean, and again, it's another one of my PhD students who worked in Uzbekistan and was looking at Uzbek dance under the Soviet Union, which had women performing in it. And then when Uzbekistan got its independence, and all of a sudden the women were not allowed to perform anymore because the political climate had changed. So yeah, politics in Mexico, certainly it's the case. So
I will surely reach out to you about these two PhD students so that I can read more about, because these are the topics I'm interested in. But thank you for your time and for everything. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'll send you those. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Did anyone else have something to share with Anya or a question?
I just want to say hi. Hi, Anya.
Hi, Brian.
To all of you, this is my first time attending the book club. I'm currently in Manila. Good evening to all of you. Well, one of my favorite lines is when Anya mentioned about this imaginative, playful, and artful dimension of human behavior. I mean, this all aspects of activity and thought that you realize after 30 years of experience engaging with Isthmus Zapotec, because I'm actually reflecting on integration versus segmentation. Because, when you go to institutions, academia, trying to learn not necessarily performing arts, because we have this disciplinal separation, like you study music, you study dance, and then you study, let's say, theater. So then it becomes compartmentalized, not the way I mean, you describe perhaps as an anthropologist when you study, for example, a particular ritual or spectacle. So I'm currently reflecting on this tug of war between segmentation and integration, because I think you mentioned here that as artists or as performing artists, uh, we we hope to achieve this wholeness, even learning, this the spiritual side, this cosmology. And you mentioned also that formal qualities are also important to learn. But I think it's a challenge, both as a teacher and also as a student. How would you teach your students, this integrative approach? So I mean, that's actually, yeah, that's my reflection. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, those are all really important issues. So thank you so much for raising them. And I guess I might respond just briefly. Well, how do you get students to do that? I listen a lot, and I think listening somebody into speech is really important, because if you talk all the time, then there's no space for them to engage. And the last class I taught this last spring was on Zoom, of course, right? And so it was a very small class on theory, which is not my big thing, I have to say. I mean, I use it when I need it, but it turned out to be one of the best classes I've ever had, because the students were so kind, and they listened to each other. And they had readings and discussion, and they would write it up and put it up on the website that we have. And everybody would read everybody else's and make comments. And I would read them all and make comments. So when we came together for the meeting, they were so energized by what other students had said that the 2.5 hours just flew past with this kind of conversation. So getting people to feel that people will listen to them, that they care, people will care about what they think, is really the only way I know in order to invite people into this kind of conversation. And what about segmentation and integration? I'll just give you one example from my work in Juchitán. People, everybody is valued, I have to say. There's this older man who died in year one of my first year of fieldwork there. And he had he'd lost all of his family. He was living alone. People would bring him food and things like that. And when he died, there was a huge crowd of people who came to honor him. And in the end, I mean, he had been a goldsmith's apprentice. So he had no money, but he got gum wrappers, those foil gum wrappers, and he would make little bracelets or little jewelry. And when he would go to visit somebody, he would give them that gift. So even though, I mean, it said, I care about you enough to do this. And so in the end, they honored that. There are two categories of people that people regard in Juchitán as being kind of wise in different ways. I got called, after I finished my PhD and the book came out, I was called a Bini Nana, Binni, and then Naana. And it means, Bini is people. And I thought, this is great. Literally, it means people with words, people with a lot of words. Okay. And I thought, I like that. It was not until maybe 15 years later that I changed this category of Bini, again, people. Genda Biani. Genda Biani means, Genda means making. Biani means light. People who make light, people who create light. These can be not just PhDs who wrote a book, who have a lot of words, but these are people who enlighten the world, enlighten people, and they can be anybody. And they bring people together across all these categories. So Yeah, it's possible. I love it. I love being one of those. So
I mean, maybe just to comment on that.
Yeah.
Actually, Benda also means giving in the context of a party or a celebration. So I guess they are not only saying that you are creating, but also you are giving. I understand that you create, but while you create, you give. But it's more about
Right. So the Raimundo, tell me where you're from.
Well, I'm from Mexico. I am not from Oaxaca, neither from the region of it's more the south. Though I have written about Mexican hat dance, which I don't call it like that. I call it, as we call it, jarabe tapatío, as you quote it.
Right.
And what else? Well, I studied lava notation. That's my main field.
Okay.
I research about the cultural construction of the system and how it is developed differently. And that's it.
That's a lot. Okay. When you say system, you mean lava notation, or you
No,
mean...
the Lavan system of movement notation. So I use lava notation to identify the kind of Americanized way of thinking about analyzing movement with the system, while I use kinetography Lavan to talk about the European general one, and Lavan kinetography or Tanzdialirash to talk about the Hungarian approach. So I use just the Lavan system of movement notation to generalize it, but it's also complicated.
There's a book that has just come out. It's a volume in honor of Yuri Martin. You know him, right? And it's full of reflections on the notation and his work on notation. So I'll send you the link to that. A lot of it.
I have it actually.
You have it?
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So you read Hungarian too?
More or less. I spent 1 year in Hungary.
Okay.
Beszélek magyarul egy kicsit, so I speak a little bit of Hungarian, but not enough to read well. But it is in English, the book. So
the book is in English,
fine.
right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They
I think we have some Hungarians and Russians maybe in the room too.
So I just wanted briefly to share a map of Mexico to find Juchitán, and here it is.
Okay.
Just because every time Raimundo and me talk about Mexico, we always talk about how big Mexico is. It's like you have a lot of countries in one country, right?
I mean, just to say, Guatemala used to be part of Mexico, right?
Yeah, and Guatemala. So, oh my God. And now in this map, I don't know why Chiapas it's marked, but actually, so this one,
that's
right?
It. Yes.
That's Oaxaca.
This is Oaxaca, the one where I have mine.
And they
Juchitán
is to the top.
Juchitán is right there.
Yeah.
So it's about 40 kilometers from the ocean.
Yeah, and you have this access to the seashore, right?
If I drive, yes. I do, yeah.
Yeah, so when I was in the university in Guatemala, I had to read a lot actually from Chiapas and from the Zapotecs, because it's like the whole anthropology kind of segmentation takes, this unit of Mesoamerica, which starts like in the middle of Mexico to Guatemala and El Salvador. So it's like a big, they used to call it cultural unit. People nowadays don't agree with that anymore, but still, like in the syllabus, you still have to read about, and it was very interesting for me from the Zapotecs, this, especially the resistance to keep their language and their culture active, right? It was very interesting. That's what I remember from doing those readings. So for me, I am really curious about how you know, the beginning of the anthropological work, I think it's always like the toughest, right? And how did you start to, and if you were allowed, maybe firstly, to learn the dances, and how was that process of learning them?
Actually, that was one of my strong points, I have to say, which was good because the Zapotec language was not my strong point at the beginning. There's actually, Raimundo, there's 3 words for that all sound the same except for tone and vowel length. Benda, benda, benda. One is sister, one is fish, and one is snake. And so every time I would go to the market women loved it when I would be buying fish, because half the time it would be snake that I would ask for, or sister or something like that. So but my husband was a linguistic anthropologist who was really, really good. And we had a 12-year-old linguistic informant who was great too, because he never got bored with answering questions. Where was I going? Learning dance. It was just once I connected through the family of the dancer who was in the delegates when I went in 1967, and I took photographs of the whole thing. And so I had these photographs, and there's a wonderful photograph of her, and I brought them with me. So I made that connection with the family, and so they realized I was interested in dance. And so the grandmother of the family was living in the compound too, and I was, my husband and I were living down the street in another house, but I would spend a lot of the day in this compound. And every time Sones would come on the radio, she would stop cooking. She would stop doing whatever she was doing. She would grab me and go out to the patio, and we would dance. It didn't matter who was there. She would grab them. And so and she was regarded as one of the really, really good dancers in the community. So for me, learning to dance was not an option. I mean, I just, and then they decided I was really good at it. Well, I better have been really good at it. So, and in fact, at the end of that first year, every time you go to one of these big velas, there are those dances, sones, and women dance with women a lot. Women dance with men too, but it's and the senior women and the better dancers are the first ones on the floor, and everybody's sitting around says, "Look, see that? That's how you need to do it." So you get a lot of, even if you're not out there, you hear what people think is really good, and then you can do it. So by the end of that first year, I had been to, I don't know how many occasions where I was dancing, and this photographer caught, paid photographers would come to those things and take pictures and then come around and sell them to you. And I was in one of these photos dancing with a woman who was one of my cousins, and her mother saw the photograph and pointed to me dancing and said to her daughter, "You see, this is how you should dance," which was really embarrassing, but it's okay. She was a great journalist. She didn't need to be a great dancer. So people commented all the time on dancing and what was appropriate. And if you got the reputation of being a good dancer, then people would want to dance with you. And so you got a lot of, so that's how it was yeah.
May I ask a question which is a little bit polemic? You know very well to dance Isthmian sones. Those sones Isthmianos. Would you, and you also were working with the Ballet Folclórico de México de Amalia Hernández. Would you say that their production is very similar of Oaxaca, is very similar to what you have seen and what you dance?
No.
Well, that's also my position about your description of the deer dance, or the dance, de la danza del venado, and the dance Veracruz, the dances from Veracruz. Yeah. You see, because in one, why do you say that then?
It has to do with a lot of things. First of all, the costumes. You never dance a son with this big resplendor. I mean, you just don't do it. And secondly, the formations. It's not danced. I mean, the sones are danced in a pareja this way, right? And so, but that doesn't seem, that's not interesting to an audience. And here comes the point about audience and how somebody who's doing a performance has to understand what the audience is going to get and need. Okay. And so that's what the Ballet Folklorico does, and it does it really well. Okay, but it's not the sones.
You see, because when I was reading your book, you know, there is always, first you are from the United States, so there is always this like polemic positioning, right, between one and the others. And so then you describe that the Ballet Folklorico dances quite authentically, not with those words, or similar to the traditional way, like the dance of the venado and the Veracruz sones. And when I read that, I felt a little bit uncomfortable. And well, since you were here, I wanted to say it.
Good for you. Which book is this then? That I said that? I'm going to go back.
Anthropology of Dance. And the page is, I have it. It's in the page number 74.
Okay. Actually, when I worked with a company in 1967, he was a yoime, he was a yaki who was dancing in the company and doing that performance. And so when I look at it later, it's totally different, right? Okay. So you have to give me the luxury of having.
I think that's very interesting. Definitely, the work of Malia has changed along the history a lot.
Yes, it's changed extraordinarily, and I think the jarocho, the presentation of the Veracruz dances comes closer to what they do because it looks to an audience like it's really hard, right? And those kind of virtuosic performances appeal to an audience. And so the pieces that are still performed, not in the same formation, not with the same costumes, not for the same purpose, but the technique of it is similar, are those that are more spectacular, if you want to call it that. So that would be my way around. I'll write you. How about that?
It will be a pleasure.
Okay. Where are you now?
I am in Paris. I am finishing the formation of as a notator in the Conservatoire.
Okay.
But I will do a project in Oaxaca this next summer with mushes. So,
who are you working with?
I'm still trying to define with where I will work, because there are also a group of muches living in Mexico City. So I am.
Yes, right. There's not been anything really good done on muche in Juchitán, I have to say. But my friend, and this might be somebody you want to talk to, Roberto Olivares, do you know him? He's a documentary filmmaker. He's from Guerrero. He's made a film on a Nahuatl, an older Nahuatl person, and he's made a lot of documentaries. And he's in charge of training young filmmakers who want to film. And one of those young filmmakers is from Juchitán, and he's going to make a film on the muche. So you need to, I'll send you some information about that. But it better be good.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I'm aware of the time, and we don't want to keep Anya for too long.
You can keep me, I don't care.
Oh, really? Okay. So Mia, I
Yes.
see you have your hand up again. Did you have a question?
Yeah, if I'm not interrupting in someone else's time, because I have a lot of questions. But Anya, it's I just would like your perspective on something that I get from a lot of my anthropologist friends. What they tell me is, what is it about dance research? What is it about dance in general that you're studying that can get you closer to understanding a culture that just normally an anthropologist cannot? It's a very generic question, but I get this a lot, that, what is it really about being so specific in studying movement that you cannot get out of just talking to people and reading about them and being an anthropologist. So I would just like your perspective on it.
People, whether they like it or not, are embodied beings. And so you have to pay attention to it. It makes a huge difference. People just don't sit in their heads and talk. They're affected by movement. They're affected by their own bodies. And at least embodied anthropology has now got some respectability, I think. When I was at a conference and someone asked me to talk briefly with ethnomusicology about dance research and things like that. And so there was a big audience of mainly students who were there. And I said, okay, I'm gonna ask you two questions. One, how many of you think it's important to learn the language of the people that you're going to be working with? And about 96% of the hands went up. I said, okay, second question, how many of you are going to learn how people are embodied, how people move? And people were looking at each other like, is this a question? And maybe 10 hands went up. And things have changed a bit since that meeting, but it was very telling that people didn't think it was important to know how to sit, how to walk, how to, not even, it's especially the non-codified movement that's hard to get, right? And I think, and anthropology for me has always been listening and doing whatever it is that a particular culture expects one to do, not sitting back and observing. I mean, observing is essential, but it's not the whole thing. And listening, because people have something to tell you when you listen. And listening to bodies is just as important as listening to voices.
But is that embodiment a little different from dance? Because dance is not only movement, it's a mixture of a lot of things, as you also say in your text, that yes.
I think I would have to, I mean, embodiment, I think it goes kind of without question, except for some of my colleagues who don't really want to deal with bodies a lot, right? But if you were looking with dealing with mouches, okay, you'd have to look at the embodiment, because talking to them, fine, talk to them, but not paying attention to that would be, you would miss 90% of what's going on there. And dance is I think dance is important in every culture. I'm not going to say that it's not, but there's a sense of what the culture values in the dance. And if you're an anthropologist, you want to know what that culture values. What do people value? What do people think about something? And you need to know what that something is. Does that help? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know how difficult it was for you at when you did your research to really make people understand. I mean, it should be pretty easy in today's time, but we still face that, at least in India, we do, that people don't understand dance research as such. So I don't know how you pushed in your time.
Hard. I mean, I was in a conference 2 weeks ago, and I was introduced, and everybody else was introduced with their 7 books and things like that, and how extraordinary it was. And I was introduced, this is Anya. Her first book was The Anthropology of Dance, and then went on and on about dance. I've done a zillion things besides dance studies. I mean, I'm an anthropologist, but you get kind of targeted in that. And then you no longer have 7 books, you've got 1 book on dance, which is just, it's the way it is. And if you have a career like mine, where I did what I cared about, some of it worked out, some of it did not work out, but in the end, I mean, that's who I am. And I was able to do that, but not without a lot of cost. And, the first book actually was not the book on dance, it was the book that was published only in Spanish. So it didn't count. When I came up for tenure, I had that book, I had the dance book, and I had my book on ethnic identity. Neither one of them counted as a real book. One was on dance, one was in Spanish, and one had tables in it, so it was a textbook. But I went where I had to go, where I needed to go. And I continue to publish at least half of my stuff in Spanish, because for me, it has to be available to my colleagues in Mexico and to my community. That's a rant, I'm sorry. But
I think it's very inspirational.
If you feel down, just send me an email. And any of you, if you have questions or comments, send me an email and I will answer you. Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your perspective and sharing everything. And Shani, thank you for making this happen. It's a real pleasure.
No problem. Thank you. I know, Paulina, you have your hand up. May I just make a very quick comment, coming from a gender perspective. And I was wondering the shift in anthropology from an observational model, from Boas and Malinowski to like a more embodied way. I was wondering if you see it as almost like a female ways of knowing, to include the body, to listen to the body, to engage the body in the field. So if you can give us a quick comment from the gender perspective.
This is awful, but none of my colleagues are on this Zoom meeting. I have one colleague who's very much looks at embodiment, but he's a musician himself, and so maybe that's different. But I think certainly, if you look at the history of the anthropology of dance, what is it? It's women, mainly. So. And I think that Yvonne Daniel was one of the people who first started, and Sailing Nest started talking about embodied things. But Victor Turner came close, I have to say, to looking at it. And Boas, to give him credit, actually filmed dance.
Yeah, he did a lot of dance with First Nations people here in British Columbia.
Yeah. Yeah. So occasionally, but maybe. Unless you work in places like Bali or India or something where dance has a kind of, people kind of think about it as having dance. Dance is not a big hot topic for if you are an ethnographer who is going to pick some place to look at. I don't think yet. That Balinese dance is the one dance form that I was totally inept. I went to a master class at Imade Bandam in Hawaii. And I went because was an extraordinary dancer, but I couldn't move afterwards. And I just didn't have it, right? So flamenco, yeah, okay, I can do that, but yeah.
Thank you. Paulina, did you want to say something?
Yes. Hi, Paulina.
Yeah, hi. I'm Paulina. I'm from cohort 10, so I'm just starting. And I'm actually, kind of from Indiana, but I grew up in Russia. And I would really liked in your chapter the part about aesthetics. I come from an anthropology background, so the way I was kind of taught to conceptualize aesthetics was from more of a Alfred Gell sort of perspective, which I like as a technology of enchantment, sort of a removal from art as a concept and looking at it. Yeah, I was wondering if you, how, if that could fit with your perspective at all of looking at the more artistic perspective with the more kind of almost dry, in a sense, anthropological perspective on aesthetics as more of a way of being necessarily than yeah, I'm not sure. My question is not very formed, but I was wondering if how the anthropological and the artistic could kind of fit together, I guess.
I think I'm spoiled because I have spent so much of my time speaking with performers and artists that I assume that their role as interpreters means that they have to pay attention to what people in whatever culture they're performing for understand, so that their notion of aesthetics is for the people that they are performing for. I mean, because that's what a performer does, takes the genre and puts it together with the audience. Aesthetics, I think, for them and for me, is kind of like Janos Starker used to talk about phrasing in music and phrasing over the long term, phrasing across the bars, right? You don't play just within the bars like that if you're doing a piece. So that at the end of the piece, with this kind of phrasing, the end is inevitable, but it's not predictable. So that if people are listening to a piece of music, when they get to the end, they say, "Ah, yes," instead of saying, "Oh yeah, I knew it was going there," right? That's the difference between an artistic sense of aesthetics and being a virtuoso. And I have a friend who he's a poet, but he also does a lot of translation of poetry. And he talks about the meaning of poetry when you're translating it. You don't translate the word for word, like you don't play measure by measure. What you're trying to do is to get the through line that floats above the line of poetry and connects to the next line. Does that make sense to you? And I think that people, when they see a really good performance, hopefully they're not counting the number of fouettes somebody does anymore. Although it's probably true. But they will have a sense of what I would call the aesthetics of that particular piece, right? So you know when you're in the presence of something that's extraordinary. But some people are that like that in their daily lives too. They're kind of crafting their lives in that sense too. So actually I have a chapter on aesthetics, a more recent one. Would you like it? I'll send it to you. Okay. Because it includes people, what's his name? I'm forgetting his name, but he wrote a book on work. Who's famous for his work with people who worked in fast food restaurants, people who did woodwork and stuff like that. And he writes a book on work, and he writes about the aesthetics of that. Rose, Mike Rose, easy name. Okay, so you can look him up. He's great. So he's in my chapter. So I really don't draw any lines between Wittgenstein and Mike Rose. Okay. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I just had a very brief comment following up on what Paulina was asking, and it's about like especially when I was doing the masters, the Choreomundus masters, and I was going through my thesis and all. Sometimes I felt that I was so much engaged with the methodological issues, with describing how I was doing stuff and how I was, accessing information and so on. So I felt that I lost this connection with this more abstract domain of aesthetic, of artistry. You know, so I really wanted to ask you, how do you feel about, you know, this disconnection of being like, you know, rigorous in the methodology, but then not missing this abstract notion of the art, and how, you know, people engage in activities that go beyond also what you can also describe in words. I don't know, and how do you deal with that?
I think it depends on your notion of who you're writing for. I mean, I've never written for the tenure committee. Or you know, I write for the dancers, for the artists, for the people of Juchitán. They're my audience, because it's their story, and they're, you know, it's really hard for me to get my PhD students to do this, because they get so. I mean, we have a course on theory, right? Like it exists by itself in the air and without connecting to anything. And so they when they're writing, they're thinking, no, I have to justify what I'm seeing and saying here because somebody else said it. And I try to say, you know, you have to justify it to the people who spent their time and worked with you and were your friends. Does that help? Not much, I know, but you have to, I mean, you have to command that. You have to command the theory. You have to command particularly the methodology, okay? But you don't have to put it in what you write. You have to write heart to heart, maybe. I mean, I just came off one dissertation revision and it was trying to get this person who's really a good worker, but was sidetracked by theory. I said, you know, all the theory in the world is not going to make a difference to these people, period. So
yeah, heart-to-heart connection is so important and really lacking perhaps in our society these days.
Right. Actually, you're that photograph behind you.
Yeah, you sent it to me.
I know. Okay, there I am dancing with this poor friend of mine whose mother said, you need to dance like she dances.
The one to this friend?
Gudelia, yeah.
Yeah. She
was not bad. And I thought it was kind of mean, but that's the famous photograph.
Yeah. Well, talking about photographs, Anna reminded us that can we take a selfie of the whole group before we wrap up the whole session?
Yes.
So for those who have your cameras off, do you feel comfortable turning them on? Anna, can you help to take the screenshot?
Yeah, I will do it. Just waiting for them to. Lenin, if you are here, please turn on your video.
I'll sit here.
Your camera. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna take the photo. So 1, 2, 3, smile. Let's take another one. I think it's better, just in case. I'm not really good with this, so I'm sorry. So one more. It's 1, 2, 3, and smile. Oh, there you go.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Anya, for this amazing session and Saturday with you. Thank you, everyone, for attending. It's been such a pleasure. Oh, Lenin, did we catch you in the camera or did you just come on? Oh, okay, good. Okay. Yeah. So I will share the recording with everyone after that. And just remember to put in your emails. Once I compile them, I will send it to Anya.
Okay.
Okay.
And I will get back to you. And thank you so much. It's wonderful to see this next generation's and what you're doing. And I need to know more about what you're doing. So just email me. Raimundo, you have to connect with this guy from Juchitán, okay? Right.
Thank you for being so available. That's very, very nice
Welcome.
of you.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
And thank you, Shani and Bea and Anna, for organizing this on behalf of the Alumni Association, because it's really nice to see people connecting and having these meaningful discussions that are so precious. We really feel privileged to have this opportunity.
Yeah, everyone, please take care and stay healthy. So, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Anya. Thank you, Anya.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Por
Muchas
nada.
gracias. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes.